Every commercial aircraft begins the same way. Thousands of individual parts, thousands of inspections, thousands of signatures. Every bolt, every rivet, every panel is supposed to leave behind a record, because in aviation, documentation saves lives.
But what happens when the people responsible for inspecting those records begin raising concerns of their own? Over several years, engineers, quality managers, and manufacturing employees publicly reported safety and production concerns involving one of the world's largest aircraft manufacturers. Their statements led to regulatory reviews, congressional hearings, internal investigations, and renewed public scrutiny of aircraft manufacturing. Investigators examined inspection reports, manufacturing records, internal communications, regulatory findings, and testimony from employees who said they believed serious issues deserved greater attention. This was never simply about airplanes. It became an investigation into quality control, corporate accountability, and the evidence hidden inside millions of pages of engineering documentation. This is the Boeing files, and this investigation begins by following the evidence.
This explainer is based on publicly available regulatory findings, congressional testimony, official investigations, court documents, company statements, and verified journalistic reporting concerning Boeing's manufacturing practices and whistleblower reports. The program distinguishes documented facts from allegations and focuses on the investigative process and publicly reported evidence.
For years, Boeing represented the absolute pinnacle of engineering excellence. But in commercial aviation, there is just no room for error. Every single panel and fastener must meet incredibly strict standards, and every time an inspection happens, it leaves a record. As we look closer, investigators discovered that employees on the floor were raising remarkably similar concerns. We're talking about issues with quality documentation, manufacturing practices, inspection procedures, and intense production pressure. Now, at first glance, these might seem like isolated incidents, but soon, they formed an undeniable pattern. And when patterns emerge, they prompt authorities to start asking much larger questions about the manufacturing systems as a whole.
That shift from isolated incidents to a pattern, well, that would eventually draw the intense attention of federal regulators, aviation investigators, Congress, and of course, the public. Because as we've established in aviation, every inspection leaves a record, and at this point, investigators had really only just begun reading through those records. Which brings us to a fascinating question. How exactly do you investigate an airplane while it's still being built? You're not looking at a traditional crime scene. Instead, you're looking at millions and millions of pages of documentation.
Investigators quickly realized they weren't just searching for one single defective part. They were searching for patterns. You see, every aircraft follows an extraordinary paper trail. We're talking engineering drawings, assembly instructions, inspection checklists, material certifications, repair authorizations, and quality control approvals. It's a massive undertaking. Every stage generates another document, and every document tells part of the story. So regulators began methodically reviewing these records, lining them up right alongside the reports submitted by employees who had raised those initial concerns. As their oversight expanded, regulators stopped looking at these as just isolated mistakes. Instead, they started testing the broader quality control systems. They had to ask if multiple safeguards exist, and they do. How could these similar concerns continue appearing? To find the answer, the evidence revealed that they had to dig much deeper into the records.
Large investigations almost always change direction when people on the inside decide to speak up, and soon enough, current and former Boeing employees began publicly raising their own concerns about the manufacturing standards they were witnessing. According to court records and public hearings, one recurring theme appeared time and time again in the testimony. It was this tension, the delicate relationship between production schedules, quality inspections, and manufacturing standards. Whistleblowers started warning about very specific, concrete issues, things like debris being left inside fuel tanks, improper shim gaps on the 787 Dreamliner, and software assumptions on the 737 MAX. Now, commercial aviation is undeniably an industry built on deadlines, right? But safety inspections absolutely cannot simply become just another production target.
Collectively, all of this testimony directed investigators exactly where to look. Experienced engineers noticed patterns early on, and soon, the pile of documents grew from thousands to hundreds of thousands of pages, shifting the investigation's focus entirely toward corporate accountability. At this point, the FAA massively expanded its oversight. They started physically visiting production facilities and reviewing quality control systems line by incredibly detailed line, all to answer one fundamental question: were these aircraft consistently being built to the approved standards? To figure that out, regulators meticulously compared engineering approvals against supplier documentation and corrective action reports.
Each finding of non-compliance, whether it involved a missed inspection or a flawed production procedure, required a specific corrective action and essentially became a newly verified piece of evidence. The entire investigation was becoming increasingly and heavily data-driven.
But there was another challenge here. You have to remember, one aircraft represents years of engineering, testing, and inspection across a massive global supply chain. The investigation was no longer just asking whether isolated concerns existed. It was asking whether the quality systems themselves fundamentally needed strengthening. And then, tragic, high-profile events changed everything. From the devastating 737 MAX crashes of Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines to the chilling Alaska Airlines door plug blowout, these events placed Boeing right back in the headlines around the world. Millions of passengers were suddenly asking the exact same question investigators had been asking for years. How does something like this happen?
The reality is, major investigations are typically solved one single document at a time. And working together, ordinary production logs, internal communications, and routine audit findings began to reveal an undeniable systemic pattern. Investigators began organizing all of this information chronologically. They asked, when was an issue first reported? How was it documented? Who exactly reviewed it? And what corrective action actually followed? Were similar issues reported somewhere else? This meticulous process is known as evidence correlation. Rather than relying on just one source, investigators compare independent records. And if multiple documents, created by totally different people at different times, all describe similar observations, well, confidence in the overall picture significantly increases.
The investigation highlighted something that's rarely discussed outside of aviation circles. Documentation is itself a vital safety system. It's exactly what allows investigators to reconstruct events years later. Think about it. Just as forensic accountants follow the money through financial transactions, aviation investigators follow the engineering documentation. One signature always leads to another. The evidence revealed that large organizations don't become safer through assumptions. They become safer through transparency, documentation, and rigorous accountability. Yet one final question remained. What does this ultimately mean for everyone who steps onto an airplane?
By this point, the investigation had become a massive global conversation. It was a conversation about oversight, corporate accountability, and the fragility of public trust.
As regulatory reviews continued, the FAA mandated strict corrective action plans, significantly increasing audits on Boeing's manufacturing operations. Because ultimately, our confidence in aviation depends entirely on the thousands of inspections completed across every single layer of verification, from the initial design phase to component manufacturing all the way to the final airline checks, well before an aircraft ever reaches the runway.
The investigation also reinforced another deeply important principle. Whistleblower reports and independent audits, they aren't signs that a system has failed. They are a crucial part of the system itself, identifying concerns long before larger problems can develop. The objective here was never to prove perfection. The objective was continual improvement. Because in aviation, every single lesson learned literally becomes part of the next aircraft.
Ultimately, the Boeing investigations brilliantly demonstrate how accountability actually works in these incredibly complex industries. Evidence accumulates. One document becomes thousands. And when independent records start to tell the exact same story, investigators no longer have to rely on assumptions. They rely on documented evidence.
The Boeing investigations also highlighted the importance of independent oversight. No engineering system is strengthened by ignoring concerns. It is strengthened by examining them, testing them, documenting them, and improving them. That process is often slow, sometimes uncomfortable, but it remains one of the foundations of aviation safety. The legacy of these investigations is still unfolding. Manufacturing practices continue to evolve, regulatory oversight continues, industry standards continue to develop, and investigators continue doing what they have always done, following the evidence. Because in aviation, every inspection leaves a record, every engineering decision leaves documentation, every audit leaves findings, and every investigation leaves lessons. This was never simply a story about airplanes. It was a story about accountability, about engineers, quality inspectors, regulators, and investigators working through millions of pages of documentation in search of answers. It showed that modern aviation is built not only on innovation, but on verification, on inspection, on transparency. Because every inspection leaves a record, every report leaves a document, every engineering decision leaves a trail, and every investigation leaves an echo.
Thank you for joining me on this investigation. If you enjoy evidence-driven documentaries exploring aviation, corporate investigations, financial crime, and forensic analysis, subscribe to Echoes of Evidence.
I'd like to hear your thoughts. Which piece of documented evidence do you think had the greatest impact on these investigations? Share your perspective in the comments below, because evidence remembers, truth prevails. I'll see you in the next investigation.